Well, the Air Force position is that we investigated UFOs for 22 years, over 12,000 sightings.
Colonel Don Burgrave, U.S. Air Force.
About 95% of all the UFOs were explainable. They were weather phenomenon, they were balloons, they were airplanes, they were lightning. And we concluded as a result of our investigations, which was carried out very scientifically, that one, there was no threat to the security of the United States, and there was no evidence that we could ever locate that an extraterrestrial vehicle had landed here.
New York lawyer Peter Gersten sued the CIA and FBI to release 5,000 UFO-related documents.
The reading of all the documents reveals that UFOs have the ability to render inoperable present-day technology. UFOs have the ability to gain access to our most sensitive military installations, unrestricted and unlimited access to nuclear installations.
Gersten, who is a New York criminal attorney who filed a suit against the U.S. government to force them to release thousands of UFO-related documents. And rather than going through this entire introduction, I'll let Peter tell the story. What kinds of information were you looking for when you applied to the government through the FOI, and what agencies did you have to apply to?
Well, basically, we were looking for UFO-related information. There's no question about that. And we had to bring lawsuits, unfortunately, against the CIA, the National Security Agency, which is more secretive than the CIA. We had to bring lawsuits against the Defense Intelligence Agency and the Federal Aviation Administration for UFO-related documents.
What was the motivation for this, Peter? Are you a UFO person interested
Well,
in
it
this?
was a hobby, but you have to remember that you can request documents of these agencies under the Freedom of Information Act. But unless they release the documents, you're forced to go into court to obtain the documents. And the CIA, for approximately the 30 years the agency was in existence and the UFO phenomena was in existence, and then interesting enough, they both came into being more or less at the same time, refused to even acknowledge they were studying the phenomena.
Were you applying on your own behalf or on behalf of a client?
No, on behalf of Ground Saucer Watch, which is a UFO organization.
All right.
And the following suits were brought on behalf of Citizens Against UFO Secrecy, which is an organization I helped start with a couple of other people.
What did you find that you didn't know?
That we didn't know? Mm-hmm. Well, at least as far as I was concerned, you can speak to Alan and he will tell you he knew this all along. There's no question about the reality and the existence of these unconventional aerial objects. You have to remember that during the last 3 years, the government, and when I say the government, the agencies of this government, from the Air Force, the Army, the Navy, the Coast Guard, the National Security Agency, NASA, all the agencies have released approximately 3,000 pages of documents that have been classified up until the present time. Documents that have been filed away in their drawers that nobody has ever seen other than military personnel. These documents have now come forward. Besides these documents, the CIA is withholding 57 UFO-related documents in their entirety. The National Security Agency is withholding 135 documents.
Do you have a clue to what's on those things they're withholding?
No, because the National Security Agency refuses to even tell us the number of documents they have. If it wasn't for the fact that we were in court and in the chambers of the federal judge, where the U.S. Attorney admitted that it was 135 documents we were talking about.
But was Ground Saucer Watch looking for some specific kernel of information? 3
documents relating to a Ralph Mayer who took a film of a UFO in 1952. And when they put in a request for any documents relating to Ralph Mayer, the CIA admitted that they had 5 documents, but refused to release 3 documents. A lawsuit was brought in September of 1977. There were negotiations, conferences with the U.S. Attorney who represented the CIA. In September of 1978, the CIA and my client, through the attorneys, entered into a stipulation where the CIA agreed to conduct a reasonable search of all UFO-related documents. In December of 1978, the CIA released 900 pages of UFO-related documents, when in 1976, they told the director of Ground Saucer Watch that they had no interest in UFOs other than the Robertson Panel report.
So all of a sudden they just found 900 pages of it.
Exactly, and the documents themselves indicated in the same year that they told Spaulding about the lack of interest, they were investigating certain UFO
Now,
incidents.
the word document carries a certain weight to it. When you say document, that could be a lease or title to a house. A document is something that's thought of being a heavy piece of paper. A document can also be a very simple piece of paper that contains really non-usable information. So you're using the word 900 documents.
900 pages of documents.
Right.
I don't know exactly.
Well, what do these pages document?
Sightings, but what are referred to in the documents by responsible, reliable persons. You see, all along, before these documents were released, we've been reading civilian reports about individuals who've been seeing flying saucers or UFOs or flying discs, and they've been ridiculed for their reliability, their credibility. Now in the documents, these pages that were released by the FBI, the CIA, we see there was no question in the government's mind that these persons were reliable. They're referred to in the documents as early as 1949 as reliable, responsible military officials, generals, Air Force personnel, seeing these unconventional aerial objects. So there's no question. So now we see corroborated evidence that the people that do see these objects, that have been seeing them since 1949, are responsible people. They're not credible. No. If they testified in a court of law.
Well, you know, when I first interviewed Alan years ago, there was a theory going around that anybody who saw a flying saucer was probably befuddled by swamp gas somewhere in Louisiana and didn't know what he or she was seeing. We've had a lot of documentation since that time.
I think that one of the main things that has come out here that Peter has done is to substantiate the credibility of many of the civilians, because it was easy to, and still is, to discredit a civilian. Much more difficult to discredit a military man. In Blue Book, for instance, we would get reports from military pilots, and that was particularly embarrassing to the Air Force, because after they had trained those men, and they couldn't very well, they could say that a civilian pilot might have been untrustworthy, but they could hardly say that to of their own military pilots. And we got case after case after case from military pilots which never hit the press.
Remember about 10 years ago, maybe even longer, there were reports of sightings in the daily press on an almost weekly basis. There'd be an account on page 3 or 4 of most major newspapers that somebody somewhere in this country had sighted a flying saucer. Oftentimes there'd be a photograph of the sky with an object or something. You don't see much of that in newspapers anymore. Are there no sightings, or is the press not reporting them? Do they consider it not to be newsworthy?
That's it. To a large extent, it's no longer news, because the same sorts of things are being reported. See, if it was something new, this is the one. There are 3 things about this whole thing, Tom, that no one can deny. They're incontrovertible points. Even the grossest skeptic can't deny them. First of all, is that the UFO reports not only exist but persist. See, when I started with the Air Force, I thought that this was a fad. In a few years, would just disappear.
Be all over, okay.
And it's global. We have reports now from 140 countries. I mean, practically as many countries as there are in the United Nations. And the most important of the 3 things is that many, unfortunately not all, but many of the reports come from highly, highly credible, technically trained people, you see.
What do the Russians say about flying saucers? Do they have anything like this going on?
Alan is the expert in that area.
Here we have a report issued under the sponsorship of the...
Let me do the commercial, and then we'll get the report.
All right.
We will continue right after this for our sponsors on the NBC television stations. The Russians, we're talking about whether the Russians have a policy on UFOs or flying saucers, as we call them.
Well, until very recently, everything you read in Pravda said that flying saucers were propaganda from the decadent Western societies. But recently, the Russian Academy of Sciences has released a report called The Observations of Anomalous Atmospheric Phenomena in the USSR. It doesn't sound like it's UFO, but they say in the introduction, we use the term anomalous atmospheric phenomenon because we consider the previously used term UFO to be less adequate for such work, since it contains a definite interpretation of the phenomenon. You see, there's the point. In the public mind, UFO is synonymous with little green men from outer space. Mm-hmm. That's putting the cart before the horse. What we are studying at the Center for UFO Studies in Evanston are the properties of a phenomenon. Here is this constant flow of reports whose contents are bizarre and tremendously intriguing. That's what we're studying. And the center is basically a collection of a rather loose association of scientists from various universities who have become intrigued by this intellectually challenging thing.
In your going through the documentation, were there any stories that you found in there where you could say, this is it? Here all the criteria have been met. Here the government is admitting, yes, somebody saw something and we must admit that it happened.
See, the problem is that if you pick out one report, there's always going to be somebody to take that report apart. There are approximately, over the last 10 years, since the beginning of 1973, at Hunter Airfield in Georgia, there was a sighting, an Army document. In 1975 in Algeria, in March of '75, there was an unusual sighting that the documents reflect. Documents are from all over the world. In 1975, over 5 SAC military bases,
particularly good ones.
there was a mini evasion of unidentified objects that called for the Air Force to implement Security Option 3 because one of the UFOs over Loring Air Force Base demonstrated a clear intent in the weapons storage area. See, that's a problem. The government on the one hand says that no UFO studied or investigated has ever been a threat to national security, and here we have in 1975 UFOs more or less invading. In 1976, there was an incident September 19th, 1976 over Iran, which the Defense Intelligence Agency, which got the report from the attaché's office in Iran, evaluated as an outstanding report, a classic report, because it contained all the characteristics necessary to evaluate a UFO report. An F-4 came in contact with a UFO, multicolored, brilliant light, and on approaching, an F-4 is an American-made Iranian jet, on approaching, and we have to realize that this is an American-made jet we're talking about in 1976, on approaching the UFO, which was spotted on both radar and visually, it lost all instrumentation and communication systems. They went out. And then when it decided to leave the area, the instrumentation and communication systems came back on. Another F-4 jet was launched, and as it approached the UFO, out of this UFO came another UFO, an unidentified object, 1/3 the size, with intense brilliance, and came straight at the F-4. The F-4 tried to fire an AIM-4 missile at this UFO.
Not a smart move, you know.
And
it's
lost
not very bright.
once again, all instrumentation, communication, and now its weapons control panel went out.
You know what I think part of the problem with the whole perception business of UFOs is, number one, you said it, we're putting the cart before the horse, but rather than identifying what the objects are, we're trying to guess what's inside the objects. The other one is movies, media. The first movie I ever saw that I can remember that related to this was one called The Day the Earth Stood Still.
That was a good one, too.
Good picture, but it was an alien force that caused some harm.
Yeah.
All the motors and the power stopped.
Yeah.
And I think we have been so programmed by fantasy motion pictures, television presentations, and in some cases science fiction writing, to think that whatever they are against us, and we better be scared of them. And I think that's part of the mindset when it comes to unidentified flying objects.
What was the first thing they tried to do when they
shoot him?
Shoot him, you see.
Yeah, sure. Well, here's the guy in the F-4 saying, "I'm going to blow that sucker out of the sky." I mean, he had no chance. Let's face it.
It's amazing, and the problem is that the government has continually misinformed the American public from way back from 1949 on.
How about from 1776 on?
You know about that.
The 1975 sightings show us dramatically that unidentified flying objects have invaded our airspace. And yet, since 1969, the federal government's position has been that it is not interested in investigating UFOs. It was in 1969 that the Air Force ended Project Blue Book, a 21-year investigation of UFOs. Their basic conclusion was that lack of evidence warranted no further study of the matter.
There was no evidence of threat to national security. There was no evidence that we had been visited by extraterrestrial vehicles. And finally, there was no evidence that after evaluating these UFO sightings, that there was any indication of scientific knowledge, the existence of scientific knowledge beyond the present state of knowledge.
But government documents on the NORAD incidents, as well as thousands of other reports, reveal that the government continues to investigate a phenomenon that is much more than just a few isolated incidents. Since 1969, as many as 10 governmental agencies have been involved in UFO inquiries, including the CIA, the FBI, the National Security Agency, and the Air Force. Attorney Peter Gersten has led the fight to unearth these documents on behalf of a group called Citizens Against UFO Secrecy.
The documents confirm the reality of these unconventional objects, and there is furthermore evidence that these objects exhibit a technology that is beyond present-day technology, an advanced technology, a more sophisticated technology.
A graphic example of that technology was reported in this document about an incident on September 19th, 1976 in Iran. An F-4 jet similar to this one was sent to intercept unusual objects seen over the city of Tehran. As the F-4 approached the brilliant object, the jet lost all instrumentation and communication. Later, when the jet tried to shoot a missile at a second object, the F-4's weapon control panel went dead.
What makes this incident interesting and significant is that it involves the malfunction of an American-made defensive tactical weapon system, specifically an F-4 jet. The interesting part of the incident is that the Defense Intelligence Agency did an evaluation of the incident and found the incident to be a classic UFO case because of eyewitness verification, confirmed by radar, and so forth.
Documents show repeatedly that UFOs have been able to penetrate our military airspace. In one incident in 1980, UFOs were seen over Kirkland Air Force Base in New Mexico. The base is a highly sensitive installation that includes an advanced weapons research laboratory. Documents show that bright objects were able to land at the base undetected by radar. When security police tried to pursue the objects, they took off.
UFOs pose a threat to national security for many reasons, the first of which relate to the general principle that these objects have been unable to be identified by this government for the last 35 years. Another reason we see in the documents, which relate to the overflights over the military bases in 1975, the unrestricted and unlimited access that these objects had.
But Gersten and his group have been stopped in their pursuit of more information. The CIA refused to send Gersten 57 documents, and the Air Force has 100 documents that it refused to release. And recently, the National Security Agency did not release 160 documents for the same reason, national security. And in May of this year, the Supreme Court agreed with that agency.
The release of that information would be both embarrassing to the agency, because it would show, once again, that the objects exist, that the objects are an advanced technology, and the objects do, in one way or another, pose a threat. So they don't want to release the information for that reason.
This New York State event occurred over a densely populated area and over a nuclear plant, prompting one eyewitness, New York attorney Peter Gersten, to suspect a government cover-up. With others, like Larry Fawcett, a police officer in Coventry, Connecticut, he helped establish Citizens Against UFO Secrecy. Fawcett, who says the way he views the world has been drastically affected by his sightings of a UFO in 1965, petitioned the government for the release of UFO-related documents. These documents, released under the Freedom of Information Act, were previously classified top secret.
An example of some of the government documents we have obtained are the overflights over the military bases in 1975, over Wurtsmith Air Force Base in Michigan, over Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana, Loring Air Force Base in Maine, Minot Air Force Base in North Dakota. Over a period of 6 weeks, unusual, unknown, unidentified objects were traveling at exceedingly quick and fast speeds. What's interesting is that even to this date, the government has not acknowledged that it was able to identify any of those objects.
The documents do state that there were confirmed sightings at all 4 bases in October and November 1975. The first sighting was at Loring Air Force Base in Maine. Loring, like the other bases, was a Strategic Air Command installation. The documents do not state, however, that these objects were alien spacecraft. They do state that the military reaction was swift and concerned. At Loring, there were 2 separate events. Something unidentified appeared in the night sky above the weapons storage area. Citizens Against UFO Secrecy, however, refer to other documents they've gotten released by the Pentagon to prove their claims.
In May of 1985, we've gotten a document that was classified top secret in 1948, and about a month after its release to the other agencies, its distribution, it was ordered, recalled, and destroyed, each and every copy. One copy was kept, and it has remained top secret, classified top secret for the last, 40 years almost. And in the document, the government acknowledges back in 1948 the existence and reality of the objects.
This woman claims that she has had a close encounter of the second kind. A second kind encounter is defined by its having physical evidence. Vicki Landrum, along with her grandson Kobe Lee, alleges that they, along with Betty Cash, were on their way home from a bingo game when they encountered something they had never seen before. The alleged event took place on December 28, 1980. Vicki and Colby were driving in Betty's car on Highway 1485, 30 miles from the Houston airport and only 37 miles from NASA's American Space Headquarters.
Kobe Lee saw a light, and he kept asking us what the light was. And he kept pulling my face around and asking me, "Mama, what is it?" And I said, "Honey, I don't know." And Betty said, "I believe it's getting closer." And I says, "Well, it kind of looks like it," but we had no idea that we were going to get hurt.
I would say within an instant or so, all of us noticed it because it lit up the entire sky. There was no way you could have missed it.
It looked like the woods were being set on fire. And inside the car, it was so hot till my handprint is yet on the dashboard of Betty's car.
They got out on their side of the car. I stepped out on mine. I stood behind the car door for just a second or so, and I walked toward the front of the automobile. I stood there for just a short time, I don't know how long, trying to see what I could figure this object out to be.
It was diamond-shaped. It didn't mean it was sharp up here and sharp down here. It was kind of round, and the fire come out the bottom of it.
But here was this huge object and flames shooting from it. And they weren't just small flames. They were gushing from it.
And Kobe was hanging on to me. And he was trying to get, he started pulling away from me, and I pushed him back in the car, and I got inside the car and put my arm around him and hugged him up real close to me.
We thought it was the end of time.
I says, Kobe, don't be afraid. I said, if you see a man, it'll be Jesus. And I said, he'll come to carry us to a better place. He will not hurt you.
It was just burning. It was just too much heat. I could not tolerate it. So Vicki screamed and begged for me to get back in the car. Well, I did, but I had to use the end of my leather jacket in order to open my car door to get back in. That's just how hot it was.
And when the object lifted and slowly moved over to the right of us, her and Kobe saw some helicopters.
There were so many of them, it sounded like a tornado.
And we counted 23. I counted 22, really. But Kobe said, there's one more. And I said, yeah, baby, that makes 23.
And there were helicopters on both sides and also over the top of the object, or like they were trying to hem it in.
The only apparent proof the women have for what happened to them is the illness they claim they suffered as a result of the encounter. It is the record of these illnesses that made this an encounter of the second kind.
My eyes were burned so till they would swell, and they were tearing till I could lay down at night, and the next morning my pillow would be completely wet, and I couldn't hardly see anything.
Vicki was treated for burns, and she and Colby Lee suffered long periods of nausea. Betty Cash was hospitalized immediately after the event. She suffered severe hair loss and was also treated for burns and nausea. Since then, she has been hospitalized several times.
It was the first time that I went into the hospital, they were treating us as burns. But then, after they found out really what had happened, then they started treating us as radioactive burns. And since, I have had cancer.
Betty's hospital records do not explicitly state that she was treated for radioactive burns. They do state, however, that she exhibited the symptoms similar to someone who might have been exposed to a radioactive element. Betty further maintains that she had no cancer history previous to the alleged encounter. Her records do confirm, however, that she does now have the disease.
No, I'm not well, by no means. I wish, I pray, that I could be.
With the help of Peter Gersten, the New York attorney for Citizens Against UFO Secrecy, the two women have sued the government to find out what it was they encountered that night. Was it a UFO, or an American weapon gone awry, or something else?
The object was there, it existed, there's no question about that. What's interesting is that for the first time, the government has suggested that it wasn't theirs, that it was possibly a true UFO. And nowhere has the government ever admitted, other than this basic document that we've gotten from 1948, that UFOs exist.
Kind encounters is the startling tale of an alleged landing of a spacecraft outside an American Air Force base in Rendlesham, England. The American military admits they are still withholding 6 documents.
In the Bentwaters case, we have an eyewitness, which is rare. We have an audio tape made at the time of the actual event. We have a government document which corroborates the existence of the incident. The government has no reason to withhold the information. There are 6 documents that the government is withholding concerning the incident in Bentwaters. I want to know why they're withholding that information. They do not have a right to withhold that information, and I want to know what that information is. Now, on the one hand, the government is still saying UFOs don't exist. Now, if UFOs don't exist, how can they affect national security? There are 3 basic reasons why the government does not come forward and release the information it has on UFOs. The first reason is technology. It is trying to learn as much about the objects before the Russians. The second reason is the vulnerability that could be shown by the revelations that might be forthcoming concerning UFOs. And the third reason is the hysteria that might be caused by the release of this information.
The concept of UFOs has intrigued people for decades, along with the idea that the government knows more than it's telling. Peter Gersten, a Scottsdale attorney, sued the CIA for its secret UFO documents. Using the Freedom of Information Act, he obtained 900 pages of material that some now refer to as the real X-Files.
There is evidence of another form of intelligence coming in contact with this planet. Overwhelming evidence. I can prove in a court of law beyond a reasonable doubt we are in contact with another form of intelligence, more than one form of intelligence.
And according to Gersten, the blacked-out CIA reports show our government knows more than it's telling.
We are not being told the truth. It is time for us to learn the truth. Until that knowledge and information comes out and the public is told that, I will not feel that I have accomplished the purpose that I'm here.
Arizona-based organization which believes that this planet is involved in ongoing contact with a technologically advanced intelligence, an intelligence that appears to be non-human, an intelligence that, for lack of a better term, is referred to as extraterrestrial. CAUS Executive Director Attorney Peter A. Gersten has publicly stated that he can prove in a court of law and beyond a reasonable doubt that this planet is in such contact. CAUS believes that the public has an absolute right to know about this contact and continues to fight for an end to all secrecy surrounding it. In 1982, CAUS did something that no other group has done before or has done since. They asked the United States Supreme Court to release classified documents about unidentified flying objects, UFOs. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court denied their appeal and thus allowed a lower court decision by Judge Gerhard Gesell to stand. Justice Gesell, in CAUS versus National Security Agency, decided that the public interest in disclosure is far outweighed by the sensitive nature of the materials and their obvious effect on national security. 16 years later, UFO documents still remain classified, and knowledge of this contact still remains secret. And CAUS is now back in court, and Peter Gersten is getting his opportunity. In Citizens Against UFO Secrecy versus Committee to Investigate Claims of the Paranormal, also known as CICOP, Gersten is coming forward with evidence to prove that this planet is in contact with another form of intelligence.
Mr. Gersten, Mr.
Meet Peter Gersten, an all-American criminal lawyer. When he's not suing people and doing all the other things lawyers do, he's taking on the U.S. government. And that's because, ever since he was a child, Gersten was fascinated by UFOs. Most people would just go out and buy a toy ray gun, but not Gersten. Instead, he has spent much of his career trying to prove that the American government has been hiding its extensive knowledge of aliens and alien contact.
I was the first and only attorney ever to bring any lawsuits against the U.S. government for UFO-related documents that actually made it into court.
His persistence and knowledge of the American Freedom of Information laws eventually led to the release of hundreds of previously unseen documents.
I must have brought about 10 lawsuits. Even when they release documents, they've always withheld something within those documents. This affidavit is a perfect example. Half the affidavit is blacked out. If UFOs do not pose a threat, if UFOs do not represent an advanced technology, then why is this all deleted?
Why indeed? He says these documents reveal the American government's obsession with the UFO phenomenon, which began during the 1940s and 50s. And they reveal the existence of government committees which were initially set up to investigate UFOs. But all along, the existence of these organizations was denied, until finally they were all closed down one by one. Despite the fact that governments kept telling the public there was no such thing as aliens, the aliens themselves didn't seem to get the message. Because according to Gersten, they just kept flying their spaceships through our skies. One case, which has been cited by many as proof of a vast conspiracy, conveniently happened in Gersten's backyard in Phoenix, Arizona.
Unidentified flying objects over the valley. A triangular-shaped object. What was in the sky last night?
The Phoenix lights lasted anywhere from an hour and a half to 2 hours, and there's never been a major investigation to determine what that was.
What is it?
I don't know.
About 10:30 at night, there were about 7 lights that had a distinct formation that just stayed over Phoenix in a triangular pattern and then left. And it's amazing to me that something can appear so brazenly over a major metropolitan area and not be fully investigated.
The story gripped the local media, but the official response was questionable.
They had a number of leftover flares on the aircraft, and each aircraft had to get rid of them because the rules prohibit the aircraft from landing with flares on board.
Gersten returned to the courtroom, but even he couldn't pry an explanation out of the authorities.
The Freedom of Information Act is totally impotent. All they have to do is a reasonable search. And they say they did a reasonable search, find anything, and the court goes along with that.
So is Gersten onto something, or does he just need to get out more?
I don't trust anything in this reality. I think it's an illusion. It's a holographic reality. It's the product of somebody's technology or something's technology. So anything is possible.
Peter Gersten is a criminal lawyer living in Arizona who made a name for himself studying UFOs. He's bought into a wild conspiracy theory that goes like this. Human beings exist in a computer program. And on December 21st, 2012, at 11:11 a.m., the exact time of the winter solstice, the current program shuts down.
I can tell you what's going to happen, what I believe is going to happen,